Welcome to the Female Finance Collective, where we encourage women to have open and honest conversations about all things money. In today's episode, we're starting a series to dig deeper into women's money stories. We're going to start with Meri-Li. So, Meri-Li, tell us, what's a story from your childhood? What was money like when you were growing up?
Thanks, Sybil. I feel like I'm a bit of a guinea pig doing this first money story share. But money growing up for me, so my parents were married, and my parents were both younger, like in their early 20s when they had me, and my dad had started his own business. So definitely that taught me a lot of important lessons because I've seen throughout my upbringing, seen my dad build his business, and I was fascinated by entrepreneurship. But my parents unfortunately separated, and I moved from Finland to Canada. And one of the things I realized was there's a lot of differences in terms of what people purchase. So in Finland, homes are fairly modest. People don't have a ton of clothing. Entertainment is lots of outdoorsy stuff. And then in North America, it was very different. So, shopping is a form of entertainment. There's always things to buy. And so I kind of, even as a child, I remember noticing those differences. I loved money and saving. One of my fond memories from childhood is the bank that I banked at in Finland gave like a giant hippo piggy bank. Like it was large, it was substantial. And I loved filling that piggy bank and loved counting my money. So my favorite, like probably my favorite memory growing up, which is actually on my website, is I would get dressed up. I would wear these tights that were like super baggy, like, like the sausage rolls kind of like coming down my legs, and wore high heels, a nice dress, and I'd have my wallet with my money that I made that day from having a store. So those are my favorite money stories growing up.
I love that.
Um, Oh, that is so cute. And I have this vision of your hippo piggy bank. I love it. Do you still have it?
I don't. I can't remember actually. When you move from one country to another, you got to make choices in terms of what you bring.
For sure.
And I feel like that might have been one thing that got left behind. And I've been searching, like I've been looking on the internet. I've seen them, and one day I'll probably purchase that piggy bank because I know my boys would really love to have that as well. So it's something that I'm scoping out.
So,
Good. I'm glad. That's like a fun memory. I love it. So now we're going to make it not quite as fun. So have you ever had to overcome a significant financial challenge? And then how did you navigate that?
So I would say the biggest financial challenge happened to me right after I turned 40. So I was just about to celebrate my birthday. My youngest son was 2 at the time, and he hadn't been feeling very well. Like we were actually on vacation, just a road trip not too far away from home. And he had a bit of a fever. He just seemed really sluggish and like low energy. And I had to go back to work. So I went into work. I had a long commute, and his dad called me in the morning, and he's like, I just can't get him up. He doesn't want to wake up, and he doesn't want to drink any water this morning. So I hustled back from work and took him to the children's hospital, and he was diagnosed with leukemia. And he was very, very sick. The diagnosis took a little bit of time because the kind of leukemia he had was a bit harder to treat and a bit harder to diagnose. So we didn't know what journey we were in for, but the quick version is he spent almost 11 months in the hospital, had a bone marrow transplant. So we were away from home. Like we had our house, we had our everyday housing bills, but we were living at near the hospital. So you have all of these new expenses, But his dad and I, we weren't able to work. Like we took shifts taking care of him. We took leaves of absence from our jobs. So it was financially a really straining period of time for us. And as soon as we got home, I separated from my son's dad. And that was the lowest point financially for me. I had hard times in my 20s when you're first starting out your life. It's tough to navigate paying bills and, all of that stuff. But that was really the toughest point in time as an adult. I thought by 40 I'd be, really having it together, and to separate after taking a long leave of absence, it was very challenging. My son had special care needs. He had a nanny to watch him because he couldn't attend daycare. And for a period of time, my expenses were way more than my income. And that was the loneliest point in time, because I felt like I couldn't go out and do anything. I couldn't enjoy spending money because things were so tight. And thankfully, like I'm Canadian, and the hospital, that is all covered. Like we didn't face expenses because of the medical bills. It was mostly living expenses and loss of income.
Yeah, that
That's
must have
so
been really challenging.
right. For a lot of reasons. I think, and I don't want to like blow over all the emotional challenges and all of those things that you were dealing with, because those are obviously really, really difficult to navigate. But then pairing that with the financial is, I think that sometimes people forget that, oh yeah, well, I have insurance in the US, or we have our medical covered, but we can all forget about those additional expenses of missing work, having to, a lot of people here will travel to hospitals that can provide specialized care. So there's travel expenses and all kinds of like elements that we don't always consider. And so I can only imagine how difficult that was. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah. Wow. So kind of to teeter totter onto the other side. So now that you've climbed out of that very difficult situation, what are some of your favorite things to spend money on?
I feel like that's evolved. So I used to love shopping. So clothing, face creams, the marketing on those like beauty products just gets to my brain. And when I was working in corporate, I worked on Bay Street, which is like Canada's Wall Street. So definitely it was nice to have like a nice purse or a great pair of shoes, things like that. And I was finding the more I earned, like the budget would get bigger and bigger and bigger. After what happened to my son, I would say it changed to more experiences. So things, I still will buy large items, but it'll be things like, for example, we ski. It is not cheap, but it's a great way to be outdoors and to enjoy time with your kids. I love to travel. And that was one of the things I realized I was missing out on. Was our family budget was enough to accommodate housing and that type of stuff, but we were also wasting a lot of money and then never seemed to have money to travel. So travel is probably the number one thing I really enjoy spending money on now.
Same. It's absolutely worth it, right? Like figuring out how to save money so you can spend money on traveling. Yeah.
Well, and don't you notice, like, as you get older, the travel changes? Like, I remember being in my 20s and it would be camping, staying in like cabins, like really like fun places. And now I gravitate to really, really comfortable beds.
Okay.
Yeah. The things you want, like during COVID, we found our travel, we had to stay within Belgium. And so we were like, we're gonna just get Airbnbs with hot tubs. Like that was our goal for our travel, was to find Airbnbs with hot tubs, right? It's like hang out in.
I love
Awesome.
that. We have a friend, they love to travel, and he's like, why would I go somewhere that's not nicer than my house? Like, that's the whole point. If it's not nicer than my house, I should have just stayed home. And I'm like, that is a luxury that you have more when you're older and you've like thought through and budgeted and planned for that. Because when I was younger, nothing that I went to was nicer than my house. It was
Right.
about leaving my house. So, knowing that you love to travel and all that, how do you approach budgeting and tracking your expenses?
So I, part of my healing process after everything that my son and our family went through was I really decided to get serious about my finances. So in a way that I use that as something to distract me, and it really was healing. So I started to use a spreadsheet. I still use the same one. It's really basic. Like it doesn't, it has basic features like summing up columns. That is about it. There's no fancy pivot tables. There is nothing to it. But what I found was that habit of just going in. I go in almost every day. I spend 2 or 3 minutes just looking at my accounts, just making sure everything is correct. I use my credit card a lot. So I always like to be on top of transactions to make sure that, there isn't anything incorrect or duplicated. So I just spend a couple of minutes pretty much every day, and I look at my spending and just see if there's any tweaks that I can make. So after doing this for, I guess, about 6 years, I intuitively know what I'm spending, but there's still something really great about having a look at it and spotting opportunities. So some months that might be, I spent less than I thought in certain areas, and I can shift that to saving and investing right away instead of having the money just go to something else. And I found that it's really helped me to stay on track. I can spend what I want on things. Like I kind of know what my safe weekly number is, but looking at it regularly keeps me focused. So I do a travel budget. I did a lot of travel last year, and I strategically put in a lot of money into my retirement savings when I left my job. So I would get a big tax refund, and a lot of that went to travel. So I had a set budget, and then I figured out how many trips that would afford, and what I could spend per night, and just kind of filtered the decisions down from that.
Like that. We actually just I like what you said about checking in on your budget regularly because I think sometimes people set a budget and then never look at it again. They're like, "Okay, well, that's my budget." And obviously that's not how it works as effectively. And so I like that you said you check in on it daily. I find that when I check in on mine daily, I am much more likely to stick with it than if I'm just like feeling like, "Oh, well, I haven't spent that much," or just going with my gut feeling. It's usually I underestimate because I forget something I bought, whether it was a need or whatever. So I like that kind of tip you shared of checking in on it regularly. I think that's super important. We just decided this weekend that when we have money left over at the end of the month, like if we don't spend out the entire budget, that we're going to transfer half to a travel thing, and then eventually we're going to need new cars, and we have not been thoughtfully planning for that. So half the extra money is going to car savings and half the extra money is going to travel. So kind of by checking it, I feel like that is a way to be more conscious of like what you're spending and how much is left over.
Yeah, and I think the big shift too for me was I used to budget, and it was purely reactive. It was like, okay, what did I do last month? I put it in categories, and I'd be like, ooh, I spent $400 on clothing last month. Like that was not great. But it's information, but it's not very useful going forward. So really looking at your spending plan or budget, but using it in a way that helps you to make future decisions or make decisions in real time. That's kind of where the magic is, when you look at your finances or track your finances. So you're not purely just entering numbers from your bank account into a spreadsheet. You have a system to see how the decisions that you make will impact your finances.
Yeah, I love that. I have a similar philosophy, and it really motivates me that I want to go on this trip, to save some extra money or put extra aside. I love what you said too about how it helps you make sure that credit card charges are accurate. I've been dealing with so much of that recently. It's on the phone, I didn't make this charge. I did go to that urgent care company, but it wasn't at that location, and they say they haven't gotten my payment yet, right? I feel like I save so much money, honestly, just that alone of making sure what I put on my credit card actually matches what I spent. I just, every time it happens and I get a refund, I'm like, I'm so grateful. And I share that with the kids because I think so many people don't. And I can't imagine how much money they're basically throwing away because somehow the charge is wrong or charged twice, or, like there's so much credit card fraud and stuff online now.
Well, it's interesting. I had a client who they rarely looked at their finances. And when we started looking at the numbers, she realized that she had 2 subscriptions for the exact
Oh
same
my gosh.
service. And she only realized that because she was looking at her
Yep.
numbers. So she was able to email and say, hey, by the way, I just renewed, but I also just renewed a month ago. So they gave her money back. And
Yeah.
you do just by looking, you spot things that are very hard if you're looking at it months down the road, because in Canada, like I'll notice a lot of companies use like a numbered company system instead of having the business name.
Mm.
And like, how are you going to remember that that was like Subway that you bought? Because it comes up as a different looking charge. So it's definitely, our memories are best within a couple of days of when the purchase happened.
I
Yeah.
set it up so that my credit, we pay, it is a conscious decision to pay for everything with our credit cards. It is also how we pay for travel. My credit card is hotels, my husband's is airfare, and that is how we often travel at a huge discount because we use points and miles for the hotel and airfare. But that said, I set my credit card up to text me every time it gets charged. So
Yes.
that's a good tip for people who forget to go back or only can go feel like they can only make time for that once a week or whatever. If you can set it up to text you every time it gets charged. I've caught fraudulent charges several times because a text pops up and I'm like, wait a second, I wasn't just there spending money. And so that's also just another quick way to get a check-in. That has worked for me. So
Yeah, that's a great idea. I actually have that on one of my credit cards for just over $100. It texts me. So there's also options, like if you want to get every charge, if you want to get, bigger charges or online charges versus in-person charges, things like that. That's, yeah, great advice. So Meri-Li, tell us about one of your favorite books or resources. What do you like to explore around money?
So I think the most interesting one I came across, so because I worked in the finance industry for a really long time, I just had this, goal that I was going to retire at 65. And that's how I created my financial plan. That was very traditional. I think the book that I read that really made me think was Your Money or Your Life. It's by Vicki Robbins, and the other person's last name is Dominguez, something similar to that. And it really makes you think about the value of money and more specifically your time and freedom. So, being more mindful of where your money is going so that you are buying your time and freedom. And that, just the lessons in that book, it really helped to shift my perspective of constantly thinking about those consumer decisions, like just buying new things, and thinking about creating a life where I had more flexibility because I was able to build up my financial resources.
I like that. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Okay, so you talked a little bit about financial goals, but is there a financial goal that you're currently working towards?
Yes. So I left my corporate job in 2022. And so this is kind of the stage I'm at where I still have about 7 or 8 years until my youngest is done high school. So I wanted to do something for work, but I wanted to do it my way. So my biggest goal is really around my business. Is I would like to have it where it sustains my business expenses and my very comfortable lifestyle. So that's a goal that I'm working for this year. And by comfortable, I mean that, all my basic needs are covered, but I still get to do things like travel and, feel like I have a little financial flexibility and also meet some of my savings goals. So I finished my first year of business. So I don't, doing that in the second year of business, it is a bit of a stretch goal, but that's the biggest one I'm working towards.
Exciting.
So exciting. I love that. Big goals are so important to have, right? You're much more likely to meet that big goal if you can dream it up and go for it than you would if you lowered your expectations. Well, thank you so much for listening to the first episode of our Money Stories series. We would love to hear from you and even interview you on this podcast as a part of this series. And so there's lots of ways you can get in touch with us. You can get in touch with us on social, through YouTube. We've even got an email address.
Really simple to get started. It's femalefinancecollective@gmail.com.
That's right. So please reach out. We're looking for amazing women like you to interview and share your stories. We would love to hear from you. You can find us on Instagram, on YouTube, at the Female Finance Collective. And please, if you don't want to be interviewed, also just send us your questions. See what you're up to and give you some advice and hear from you. So we look forward to chatting again next week.